Laura, I think it was you who said a minute ago that things are going pretty well and then HB2 happened. When things fall apart, when stuff hits the fan, we say, shift happens. I'm glad to know that shift is happening on the paradigm with regard to how people are treated, but the HB2 law is scary. I was torn between talking for a brief time just now about how harmful this bill is from a spiritual place and regarding one's spirituality, and talking about the positive things that can happen to create the shift in the paradigm that needs to keep happening from a spiritual perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk as fast as I possibly can, and I'd like you to listen as fast as you possibly can, and I'll say both of those things as quickly as I can. Or not. How many of you are part of some sort of religious or spiritual community? Okay, more or less. So, I'll tell you a little bit about our story here at Trinity and how we came to be a safe place for people who identify of any sexual orientation. We began many years ago having conversations about the importance of sacred writing and sexuality. We began talking about that because it was forced upon us to some degree. In other words, things were happening there was this great upheaval, and our church is a part of a denomination that has been out front on ordaining gay and lesbian people to Christian ministry since 1972. The United Church of Christ, of which our congregation is a part, in 1982 passed a resolution called Being an Open and Affirming Church, which meant we specifically welcome openly, and not only welcome, but affirm people of all sexual orientations. It was just lesbian, gay, and bisexual at the time. Transgender came a few years later in another resolution on the floor of our synod. And then that came to be included as well. What this did in our denomination at every level was through all the congregations and all of our associations into a lot of turmoil. People were disturbed by those resolutions. They were very uncomfortable with those resolutions, particularly here in North Carolina and particularly in Western North Carolina, of which our church is a part. So much so that our association, meeting as a body, passed a resolution saying that our Committee on Ministry would not recommend for ordination any openly, and pardon the language I'm going to use here, any openly and practicing homosexual. It just so happened that I came on to that Committee on Ministry. Actually, Jim Staunton, Reverend Jim Staunton, I think you were on there just before I came on, the same Committee on Ministry. And we had a candidate come to us, who had already come by the time I was on, came while you were there, I think, who, as a part of her faith journey, just had a conversation with the Committee on Ministry and said, I need for you to know something. I am called into this ministry by God, and I think honesty is a pretty valuable virtue going into ministry, and I want to be honest with you about my sexuality. She said, it isn't all of who I am, but it's a part of who I am, and I need for you to know part of my story around that. So she told her story. She was received as a student in care. She completed all the processes for ministry she needed to complete educationally. And then it came time for her to be ordained. So it had to come back to our committee, and we had to make a decision about whether to recommend her against a resolution in this association that had already been passed many years before that said we wouldn't do that. And we talked, and we talked, and we talked, and we discussed, and we discussed for far too long and too many years, keeping her in limbo about her calling. Who were we to do that? The outcome of that is that it was a long and difficult process into which this congregation was thrown because I happened to be the pastor here, and because as chair of that committee, I was adamant that we had made a promise to her already, and besides that, she was a human being, a child of God, and who were we to say she could not be called of God to Christian ministry? And so we eventually did recommend her for ordination, and she was approved. What that gave this congregation was some opportunity for me to be talking about that with the congregation, because I wanted them to know what was going on. I didn't want them to think, and I was clear from the time I came here almost 16 years ago that I was about inclusion and equality for people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So there wasn't any illusions about that, but I needed to keep reinforcing the people in this congregation that that's where I was standing with that. So that process for us becoming a safe place here. Looked like, sort of like that to start with, and people left. Many people left after the United Church of Christ in 2005 passed a resolution on marriage equality, calling for marriage equality. In 2005. But there were people in this congregation who were willing to stand up and say it isn't right to discriminate. It isn't right to leave people out. It isn't right to judge people based on how they were created in the image of a divine creator. And in fact, some of those people pushed me and said, we've got to do this. We have got to officially say this is who we are. And we did a process of identifying who we are as a congregation. And it was our board who said, yes, we are an open and affirming congregation. We hadn't taken a vote on it yet. In our denomination, it's something that the congregation has to decide together, that we will be a safe place and a welcoming and affirming place for people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Our board said, yes, this is who we are. And I said, okay, if this is who we are, then why do we not tell people this is who we are? And they said, well, why do we really need to tell people if this is who we are and we're welcoming people and we're nice to it, we treat people as people, why do we need to say that? Since we're a Christian church, I said, because you don't take who you are and hide it under a bushel basket. You let it shine from the hilltop. Well, they were convinced. I didn't have to break too many arms. But they were convinced that this is who we are, and so we should say so. And I said, okay, I need to hold you to one thing. The congregation needs to approve this. You need to back it up when we take it to the congregation. And I said, and you need to know this. If we decide this is who we are as a congregation, then I will not be bashful. I will be very bold in proclaiming this to this community and all others, and I will expect you to do so as well. And lo and behold, in 15 years, it's the only time they listened to me. And bought into it and said, because It is just the right thing to do, regardless of whether you're Christian or whether you're Jewish or whether you're Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu or Zoroastrian or Sufi or whatever else one may be spiritually. It is just the right thing to do. So, shifting this paradigm in spiritual communities, churches, synagogues, mosques, other places of worship and gathering religiously and spiritually is crucial to shifting this paradigm. Why? Because those are the people who hold such emotional attachment to what has been. What's going on with HB2 is that politicians are afraid that people, and predominantly people in churches, Christian churches, are going to vote them out of office if they don't say a certain segment of our population aren't good enough. So, here's a couple of reasons. Some of the harm that's done in our houses of worship and gatherings is, as Laura already mentioned, internalized oppression, internalized phobia about one's sexuality, and that gets reinforced all too many times in places of worship. So, here's some things that we can do and you can do wherever you are, in whatever house of worship you attend or gathering that you are a part of, spiritual or not, religious or not. Here's some things that you can do. One is ask questions in those gatherings. Our story started here when people started asking questions about why do we exclude people. Ask questions. Ask the religious leader of that community. Why do we do this? Be informed, be educated, and there's a lot of resources here by which you can do that. Choose your words, because words matter. There are a lot of resources that you can find online now that will help you if you don't know which words to use and what terms are acceptable and which ones are not. But insist those be used in your churches. You'll have to ask some of the panelists. My mind's drawing a blank right now on what those websites are. But if you talk to me later, I can find you what I'm talking about for those. Be prepared for some hard work ahead. It's going to be hard work, defeating this harmful law. Be bold, be courageous, and most importantly, be connected with other people who can give you support. I liked what Becky said in that poem of life. What would you say? Life together is live better, or something like that. Say that again. Life is better together.
Life is better when you do it together.
When you do it together. So be a safe place. How much time do I have left, Brent? Do I need to stop? No, I'm not going to take all I want because nobody else will get to talk. But, so let me just, I'll give you 3 or 4 important ways that this HB2 is harmful from a spiritual perspective. First and foremost, it's not nice. It's just not nice. It's not loving. Or to put it the way my friend Rusho Jeffas, a Buddhist leader in Charlotte, says, hate is against my religion. It's pretty simple. It's hate is hideously unspiritual and unreligious. Discrimination causes unhealthy systems, and included in all those systems are unhealthy religious systems. It causes polarization, and polarization causes harm to all the organizations in our society. But something few people think about is this kind of hateful discrimination harms the harmer as well. We're not the only ones harmed by this bill. Advocates and people who identify as transgender. Those who pass this bill are harmed by this bill too. because it lessens who we are as a people. It diminishes the image of the divine within us all.